My guest this morning is Amber Palmer, and she has written a book called The Sapphire Myth, and I'm looking at the cover of that, and I know for a fact this is going to be an interesting conversation because I also know the synopsis of the book. I haven't had the opportunity to read the book, and I usually don't get a chance to read the books that the guests that I interview until after the interview. Usually before the interview, I get a chance to skim it. I can do the back cover. I can, skim a couple chapters or whatever, but I don't get a chance to read the entire book until after the interview is over. All right. That's because, every week I have a different author. So, and yes, I'm always in between 25 to 30 books that I'm reading at the time. So I'm looking forward to reading The Sapphire Myth just based on what I see on the cover. But in any event, Amber Palmer is on the line. She called in right on time. Amber, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
I got to tell all of my guests, once I hear my guest's voice, I get even better. Because that way, because it's an early morning show. I say this each week just about. It's an early morning show. Anything can happen overnight in terms of, we agree to it, but, anything could happen overnight. And then folks might oversleep. And there's no tell. So when I hear the guest's voice, I'm like, yes.
I made sure I didn't oversleep. It's the last thing I wanted to do. But please.
Well, I am glad you were able to join me this morning. And I was sharing with the listening audience, I have the opportunity to interview international guests, and I have the opportunity to interview local guests. And you will fall in our local category. There's one of our authors in the local area. And actually, you're here in New Jersey, correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so there we go. In terms of, when I say that because I have guests from all over the country. I have guests from California, guests from Michigan, guests from Florida, guests from Texas. I have guests from all over the country. So every now and again, I will get one right here in the home state of New Jersey, of which today you happen to be.
Yes.
All right, so I'll tell you what, we know you're in New Jersey. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I went to school, went to University of Arts in Philadelphia. My major was writing for film and television. And it's kind of interesting because writing a book was probably on the last of my list of what I would ever do. But the pandemic really inspired me to look at some of my old writings, and it made me go right back into my poetry, which is something I actually did while I was in high school. And ironically, a lot of the poems that I had written connected to a lot of what I was going through during the pandemic, and as well probably as the rest of the country, is trying to find some type of purpose. And if you do know your purpose, trying to get back to it. Because unfortunately, there's been some people that, was lost or depressed, and it was just a blessing that I was able to find something that really helped guide me during last year. So it's a blessing that I managed to write The Sapphire Myth during that time.
So I tell you, it's interesting in terms of, you said you majored in film?
Writing for film and television.
Writing for film and television. What did that major consist of, and what does that feel like? And in terms of ultimately, what did you look to do with that?
I was taught how to write television screenplays, film screenplays. I was taught editing, lighting, directing. I was taught a little bit of everything, but my focus was mainly on writing and the structure of which you primarily see on television, which you see on film. There's a whole 3-act structure to it. There's actually a science to it. So that's what I was taught. And I also had other majors as well, like psychology, regular English, Shakespeare. But that was my primary focus. But my goal was to ultimately make TV shows and films, which is still my goal. And that's another thing, too, as well as not only my poetry. I also did a lot of writing, came up with a lot of ideas. So once again, I even though last year I know it was unfortunately rough, but I'm truly thankful that I was able to tap into my creativity. So I'm hoping after this, I'm just hoping and praying that there's a wider door open for Hollywood and new writers. I'm hoping.
Absolutely. Now, there's something that you said as you were explaining the major and what you did. You said, and this is what I don't think many people, maybe some, but not many people really understand in terms of film, TV. There is a science to it.
Yeah,
like what they see on television is intentional. Somebody wrote those scripts. The actors and actresses had to do them over and over again until they got the right feel that the director was looking for, and all. So there is a science to it that I don't think people. That's why I say when you said you majored in that, like, okay, wow, that sounds like it was a fun major. That wasn't journalism and it wasn't communications.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun major, but it really is a science. And the great thing about the course is that one thing about that major, you're not just taught just writing. You just don't. It's just not writing. You're literally taught everything about the film world, the television world, the business of it, how to go about getting an agent, representation. You're taught a little bit about everything about it. So, it's like a full experience. It's not secular,
Right. Now that is just like the music industry, and it's a cutthroat industry. I mean, it is cutthroat.
It is difficult.
I had a teensy-weensy bit of experience with that probably close to almost 30 years ago now, somewhere in there. I was doing the Cannes Film Festival. One year, I was working for AT&T in their marketing department, and the particular product that I had was called AT&T Direct. And so we had a booth at the Cannes Film Festival. And I would go up to these producers and directors, try to talk to them for a second, and they were like, soon as I would say what I was about, but I didn't even get a chance to say what I was about, because they're like, what film are you with? And like, soon as like, bam, they were out. Like if you,
it's true.
They were out. Yeah. If you weren't talking film, if you weren't talking something having to do with the movie industry or whatever, they were out. So very, very more than, I know what people see in terms of when you see stars on TV, but there's a whole lot that goes behind that. Like you said, a science to it.
It definitely is, because sometimes it's like, as soon as you don't have an agent or a manager, sometimes they immediately just don't want to be bothered.
Right.
I was very close to getting a manager, and the person who set me up with it was very gracious about and appreciative of it. I was very appreciative of what they did, and when I did finally speak to the manager, they completely act like they didn't know me.
Right.
And the reality was because they really wanted somebody who had experience. So, but still, nevertheless.
No, you got to keep pushing regardless. Now, they can be very abrupt, very dismissive. That's kind of like that business. Like everything was with them. Truly, time was money, and money was time. Like if you weren't doing something that was going to make them money, they were like out. And like you said, they're looking for somebody with experience. But at the same time, you'll get somebody, and since this is Women's History Month, is a perfect segue in terms of topic. You'll get somebody like a Shonda Rhimes. You'll get somebody like that has done. I think Shonda did Grey's Anatomy and a whole bunch of other like successful shows. And I know she had an issue a few months ago with Disney or someone when she couldn't get tickets, and she just said, "You know what? Forget you all.
I'm out."
Right?
I'm out. I'm moving on.
However, but that's kind of what your book is about, because I read the synopsis of the book and the Sapphire Myth, and I actually thought it was a story. I didn't realize it was a poetry book. So we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of, but the book Sapphire Myth that Amber has written deals with this whole notion of when, particularly African American women, when they express themselves, immediately they're labeled that other women in other cultures are not labeled when they express themselves.
Yes.
So when I just used the example of Shonda, Miss Rhimes, whenever she got into that tiff with Disney, who was her employer, and then she goes to Disneyland and couldn't get tickets or whatever the situation was. So she's like, you know what, I got to be bothered with this. Immediately, angry black woman, aggressive, so forth and so on. And that happens to African American women quite often, that whenever they're asserting themselves or whenever they're doing what anybody else would do, whether it be a man or whether it be another woman in another persuasion, they're automatically a label. Michelle Obama, all right off the bat, angry black woman.
Yes,
So let's talk a little bit about, matter of fact, before we even get there, what made you, because I'm going to work my way up to that, what made you want to major or be a film writer? Or, did you read a lot as a child? Did you write a lot as a child? How did you come to that decision that I want to take this major?
Since I was a child, yes, I did a lot of reading, and I did a lot of writing, a lot of stories, and I was also influenced by soap operas. I used to watch soap operas with my grandmother when I was younger. And when I was a kid, there was like certain films, I can't really name too many on top of my head. There's like tons of films that I would watch on repeat when I was younger. And I just knew that was my passion. I was just obsessed with television and film. And I just knew that somehow that's gonna be my future one day. That's gonna be my career, because I'm devoted to telling stories that I don't necessarily see, and I am just hoping that I can at least inspire other people around the world and just have a positive influence.
That's interesting, because I start the show off every Saturday morning reading from a couple of different books. And one of them that I read from this morning is Words of Wisdom, Daily Affirmations of Faith, and it's by Reverend Run. He was from Run DMC. But you just said the word obsessed. And I read that this morning because he said, become obsessed with your assignment.
Yes.
The best way to disconnect from wrong people is to become obsessed with doing the right thing. When your obsession is to do the right thing, wrong people will find you unbearable. When I think back, I remember being extremely focused to the point of obsession while forming Run DMC. Remember, you will succeed only when your assignment becomes an obsession. Stay focused. Now, I just read that this morning and I heard you use the word obsessed. And that's exactly what you will have to be if you're going to, particularly in Hollywood. You're going to have to be like, I don't care what door closed, I'm going to the next one.
Yeah, you have to.
You do. Because if you're thin-skinned, you won't make it in Hollywood. Because you have to take on that attitude. For every no, eventually a yes is going to come.
Yes. You got to be relentless. You have to be. Because it's a lot of no's.
Oh, absolutely. The same thing. The same thing with writing a book. It's a little bit different day now in 2021. I remember when this show started 20 years ago, self-publishing was just kicking off. But up until that point, you had to go to one of the large publishing houses. And I know a lot of authors who got no's going to the large publishing houses. Self-publishing has alleviated that some, only because folks say, okay, big publishing house, you don't want me, I'll do it myself. The only problem with that is you got to be on point in terms of if you self-publish, your stuff got to be on point, because nobody wants to read stuff that's not unedited, hasn't been edited. A lot of grammatical errors, a lot of spelling errors. Folks don't want to read that. So that's the only thing with self-publishing is you got to be on point. But back to my point of a lot of no's, authors got a lot of no's, and they had to keep going until finally a publishing house said, okay, you know what, let's take a shot with this. So Sapphire Myth, is that self-published or is that through a publishing house?
It's self-published.
Okay.
Self-published through Amazon.
There we go. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. Those opportunities didn't exist for authors 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And they were, like I said, they had to go to the random houses and the other big houses. And, like I said, they get a yes or no, or they had to keep chuckling along. So, all right. So we have you. So you did read a lot as a child, which makes some sense. And writing, did you journal as a child? Usually my poetry authors were very good journalists in terms of keeping journals and always were writing something. And I heard you say something about imagination also.
Yes, I can't say I did too much of journalism, but I wrote a lot of stories. It was just mostly stories. Mostly stories. The majority of my poetry came from when I was in high school, and it was a little bit I did when I was in college. It was mostly stories. I do enjoy journalism in general. But, it was just mostly stories.
Well, when I say, in this particular instance, when I said journal, did you keep a journal? Not necessarily journalism, but did you keep a journal and you just wrote down your thoughts or whatever in them?
I never necessarily kept a journal.
Okay.
I tried.
Oh, okay.
I've tried to journal, but no, it's really funny that you said that, because there are times I said, you know what, I should have a journal, and I actually did buy myself one. I said, you know what, maybe I need to focus on doing that to try to get my thoughts out, and I think that's a good idea. I think I'm going to stick to it. I think I am going to I'm going to go and make a journal.
Well, it sounds like it's kind of sort of similar, but many of my authors, particularly poetry authors, a lot of their poems came from journal entries, something they were, and it sounds like for you, it came from your stories you wrote. Yes. All right, so it's the same concept. It's just like for many, they put down whatever's going on, because the good thing about a journal is between you and God. It's between, nobody else technically, and people do, but technically people should not go in anybody else's journal. So it could be whatever you want to write in there. And in any event, a lot of times the poetry springs from that. It sounds like in your case, your poetry sprung from your stories.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about, in terms of, because, I deal with kids on a daily basis, and they get very imaginative when it's time to tell a story to get them out of trouble. However, in terms of just using their imagination, like, okay, make up a story for me, they seem to kind of struggle. Where did you, and in terms of your imagination, where do you think that came from, or was it from watching the soap operas?
It was a mixture of soap operas, it was a mixture of television. I think what really sparked my imagination the most, it was, at the time, it was mostly like a story dealing with teenagers. And at the time, I was a teenager. And my poetry at the time was like heavily influenced by being in school, dealing with peer pressure, dealing with bullying, dealing with just getting out of high school, just even surviving high school. So it was a plethora of times. Poetry is what really kept me sane, and it really was what kept my spirits up.
I know that's right.
So it really it really helped me deal with a lot while I was in high school. And, on top of that, I would write some short stories here or there. But it was really just, when I would write, it's like, I just want to take myself into like a different world.
Correct. No, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's exactly what, like we were talking about writing in a journal a couple of minutes ago, that's exactly what the journal does. And I had an author last week who was saying how reading does that. And I've said that, reading could take you to places that you may never go physically. Mm-hmm. You could read, a lot of the places I've read about, I ultimately did wind up going to at some point. But there are places that I've never been to that I've read about that I might as well have been there.
Yes.
Just from reading it in the book, if I were to go there, I would feel like I've been there before.
Yep, that's the goal.
And so what you're saying, like reading and writing, they're wonderful releases. They're a wonderful way to go to a different place, and you don't have to leave your seat. Yes. Reading can do that for you, and writing as well. So, okay, so we had the film, we had the major in school, you've been writing since you were a kid. Oh, and by the way, I heard you say something about the teenager. There's a whole market that's called YA, young adult.
Yes, young adult, yes.
There you go. So you can, if that's your area, then if you really feel like you connect and you can appeal to them, you never know. You might write for just that area, for that target market, the young adult market. But all right, we're working our way up. You've done your major, and you said during the pandemic, you were kind of like, and I'm jumping around a little bit only because thoughts come to my mind as we're talking. Last night, I'm watching the news, and they were talking about it's been a year since Broadway was shut down. And some of the things that you were saying is exactly what the producers, there was one producer on there, his name was Zane Mark, or Mark Zane, something like that. I think it was Zane Mark. And he was producing, he said he had 4 Broadway shows that he was working on at a time, and he said he went from 4 to 0. Wow. And then some of the actors and actresses on Broadway, they were saying the same thing. I had this audition lined up, that audition lined up, and then when the pandemic came, boom, gone. Right? Yeah. So I think they said with Broadway being shut down, New York lost like $15 billion. Oof. But that just that industry alone, New York, that industry, they lost $15 billion in the Broadway market. So a lot of what you're experiencing as an artist is exactly what they were saying last night on the news.
Yes, exactly. It's, writing is very cathartic. Any piece of art is cathartic. And, when your art is to perform for others, that can be even more heartbreaking because, especially at Broadway, like, you feed off of the audience. You feed off of entertaining. And when you don't have that outlet anymore, it could just be emotionally devastating. And, it's not like, of course, they need money to survive. But I think even above that, it's just like, this is what you live and breathe. And all of a sudden, it's, it just stands still. And you're stagnant. It's like, what do I do?
Right.
So it's like emotionally, it's devastating for all artists. It's just like, what do I do? I can't go here. I can't go there. I can't meet up with people. So
That's
really...
Exactly.
It's a blessing to just, if you were able to do something with your art out of all of this, and that's a blessing.
Absolutely right. Because again, that's the same sentiments are what they were sharing last night on the news and so what they started doing now, since things are beginning to ease up a little bit, they started doing like little intimate performances literally on the street. So on a couple of the blocks in New York, some of the musicians, the actors, the producer, they're doing like little mini excerpts of the play on the street. And what they said was they wouldn't broadcast it because they didn't want large crowds, but whoever just happened to be walking by could get a glimpse. And some of what you were just saying, a lot of them said, like, I went into depression, so forth and so on, because they did not have that connectivity to an audience. So during the pandemic, you decided to now write this book.
Yes.
All right. So talk a little bit about, what was that process? How did you go about it in terms of what did you, like, I've now made the decision, because you said this is your first book. I've now made a decision to write a book. What was that like for you?
I originally always wanted to do a poetry book. I guess I just didn't have enough motivation to do it. And one thing about being home, I just was going through a lot of my writing, a couple of my notebooks, and I saw some of the poetry that I had, and I started to read the poetry, and I was inspired by what I had written for my own self, and which was amazing because I usually do not, but this time around I'm looking at it after like a couple of years, and even some of the poems, like I said, I did during my teenage years, and I said, you know what, I need to put this in a book and hope and pray that this hopefully inspires someone or helps, hopefully someone can relate to it, or hopefully it can help keep them sane. And I just, I think I had a little bit more than, I had cut down some of the poems, because some of the poems didn't exactly resonate to who I was now compared to when I was, of course, a teenager. So some poems I took out, and I just picked the poems that I felt like the most that people could really, really relate to. And I just looked at what I was writing, and what was so eerie about it is that it had such a huge connection to, in general, what I saw people were going through during the pandemic. So, I'm just looking at this hopefully this is something that can be cathartic for people. I just hope it helps someone out there.
Absolutely. Now, the one thing about poetry can do just that. Because, as a matter of fact, do you have the book anywhere near you?
Yes.
Good, because whenever I give, particularly on poetry books, the author, I always like for them to read their own pieces, only because you know exactly where the inflections, where the intonation, where the emphasis or the pauses, you know exactly where you want to put them in a piece, compared with if I were to read it, I might not know that. So I always like the listening audience to have an opportunity to hear a spoken word or a poem from the author. And for those of you listening, as you know, anytime we do poetry, if you were in a spoken word club or a poetry club, they don't clap their hands, they snap their fingers.
Yes.
So that's yes. Right. So once the author is done reading his or her work, they, the audience snap their finger. They don't clap their hands like if we were at another performance. They snap. So you all know that because we've done that. You hear me snapping now.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a chance to kind of decide which piece or pieces that you would like to read over the next couple of minutes or so. In terms of the cover, what is that you?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, it's not. And it was like that on purpose. I purposely didn't want a picture that was technically me. And by the way, the wonderful illustration is by my cousin, Fareed K. Williams.
All right.
Yes. I want to give him a shout out. But no, it's not me. This is just, I gave him a description and he did a wonderful job.
So it is, first off, as an alpha, I love the colors, the black and gold. That's the first thing.
Yes.
So needless to say, I felt, as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, I love that cover. But, and it's an African-American woman and it's contemporary, which has the nose ring, it has the earring. So it even has the accents in the hair. I can see, I see all of that leaps out of the cover. All right. It's all on there. And so it is and I gave you the synopsis a little bit earlier in terms of this whole notion of how black women, African-American women, are labeled if they express themselves. Talk to me. Why did you focus on that? Where did that come from?
I focused on that because that seems to be the common narrative I seem to see with black women. We are constantly labeled. We're constantly belittled. We, if we're outspoken, like for another woman, it can be, oh, they're outspoken. For us, it's angry or ghetto or, why does she complain all the time? Or it's like, oh, she should be glad she just has this opportunity. Who is she to complain about being treated differently, which any other woman normally can say, oh, I'm being treated a certain way, I'm being mistreated. But, as soon as we do it, it turns into we're angry. And I just was seeing this narrative, it's been around obviously for years and years, but it's just like I zoomed into it and I said, you know what? I want to make it clear that, the sapphire, which is a derogatory term of black women, it's a myth.
Correct.
And it's a myth when you read our work, whether it's anything, whether we're painting, whether we're acting, writing, directing, it's to show that it is truly a myth. This is not true. So that's what made me name the book the Sapphire Myth.
Absolutely. And we can, I know we have about a half hour to 40 minutes or so left, but you want to talk about long discussion? We can engage in that and just the few things that you just said. Because absolutely, that's why I said this could have fit in Black History Month as well. A couple of weeks ago, my school, we have a Saturday academy. And what we did was the first couple of hours, the students had an opportunity to make up any work they had missed. But for the second couple of hours, we actually watched a film, and we watched Hidden Figures. Okay. And Amber, when I tell you the energy, I had seen the movie before. Now I knew the movie, and I had seen the movie, but the energy that was coming up off that movie, I could not sit down. I stood up the entire 90 minutes or what, 2 hours. I think that movie was 2 hours, 120 minutes. I stood the entire time because I could not sit just from the energy that was coming off the scenes. And since you're in screenwriting and film writing, then you get an appreciation of what I'm talking about. Yes. But the things those women were going through, and they were the main contributors. I mean, the young lady that made it to the office, she was the smartest person in the room. And yet you had all these white men acting as if she didn't know anything.
Yep. It's very dismissive.
Yes. I mean, I am not exaggerating when I tell you I could not sit down. I mean, the bathroom scenes in there, every time she would have to go to the bathroom, when she had to run a half mile in order to go to the bathroom.
In the rain.
Yes. So I mean, and then there was something like the scene where John Glenn says, what's the figures from the girl? Like if she clears it, then I'll go. That was power. I mean, there was a lot of powerful scenes in there, but there were scenes that showed exactly what you were talking about. Then when you put racism in there, it really gets, because there's a scene in there with the coffee pot. They wouldn't touch the coffee pot that she.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah,
I mean, so.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a powerful movie, but it illustrated in terms of how women were treated, and that was not, well, it still is to a degree, but that was not that long ago. You're talking the 60s, all right. And now they were called computers. They didn't call them human, but they were called computers, and they were set aside. They were in their own building, thought they couldn't do anything, and yet they were the smartest characters in the movie. I'm saying all that to say, in many instances, that's the case. And exactly what you just described is what it always boils down to. Oh, they're just angry. They're assertive. They're this, they're that. They're that. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, that's the part that, as a black woman, it's terrifying because, it's like I'm just putting my input. I'm putting in my 2 cents, just like any other, woman can. And, the number one problem that has always been for me is the dismissiveness. Like, you're not even taking the time to even listen.
Correct.
It's like, just listen, please, just listen. It's just an automatic, no, not listening to you. And that sometimes is where the anger can come from. You're not just waking up just angry. You're angry because of, like, you're dismissing me, you're not listening to me. You're clearly treating me differently from other people. It's blatant. It's in my face. You're not even hiding it.
Correct.
So it's like, what else can you expect? Is any normal human being is going to get frustrated, So it's like we end up being, the poster children for anger.
Correct.
For no apparent reason. It's like we're being set up.
No, absolutely right. I mean, and as you're talking, my mind went back to the debate between Kamala Harris and Mike Pence. Now, and Kamala was good. They can say what they want to say. Kamala was very good because he was exactly what you just described in terms of being dismissive. That's what Mike Pence was doing to her. He was acting as if what you say don't matter. Whatever I say matters, but what you say don't matter. Now, see, me as a man, I hate when anybody do that to me in terms of, okay, you get a chance to have your say so, but now when it's time for me to talk, you either going to cut me off, because I tell you, if anybody does that to me, whether it's my wife, sister, whoever, I get an instant attitude. I mean, you want to talk about get hot quick? Let me give you a chance to have your say, and then now when it's time for me to have mine, you act as if mine don't matter. Because see, that's the other thing. I know it's Women's History Month, but believe it or not, women do not corner the market on feelings. Men do have feelings too. So, and I'm just going to throw that in there. But in any event, that whole feeling, that frustration that you just talked about, I can relate. I understand what you're saying. Mike Pence had his say. Matter of fact, was going overtime. And now when it was time for Kamala to talk, he going to jump in on her.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right. And at one point, he tried to tell her what her job was. And I was so glad when she turned around like, you're not going to lecture me. I mean, because, and needless to say, the world saw that I'm speaking.
Yes, exactly. I'm speaking.
I know that's right. And she just gave him that look.
You sure did. Like, listen, I'm speaking.
Right. She didn't say it loud, and she didn't say it nasty. Now, mind, because this is I'm going to tie this into what we're talking about with this angry label. She didn't say it nasty. She didn't say it loud. She just turned her head and looked at him and said, "Excuse me, I'm speaking." And yet, Donald Trump called her a monster. Other folks was talking about, she was angry. I didn't see any of that.
No, of course not. I mean, that when he said monster, oh my God, it went all over me when he said, I said monster.
Let me tell you something, and I'm going to let you finish and keep that thought, but I just wanted, when you said that, I was not a big Omarosa fan because I thought Omarosa had lost her mind whenever she was in that whole administration. So when she left, I was like, okay, but then she wrote the book, and I had said I refuse to buy her book. I will not buy Omarosa's book. But simply because she was fooling around in that administration. But then Trump called her a dog. And I said, oh,
Wow.
it's on. Now, I turned around. I downloaded her book immediately after that. I said, I let folks know the only reason I bought her book and supported her book is because that man called her a dog. I had that same feeling when he did that with Kamala, when he called her a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how dare you? This woman, Omarosa, you call her a dog, and now you turn around with Kamala, call her a monster.
Monster, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But
it's just brutal. It's brutal. Oh my gosh.
Yes. So the only reason I downloaded Omarosa's book was because Donald Trump called her a dog. But I did buy her book because of that. And then I kind of shifted back to kind of supporting her. So when I see her on social media now, I'll like her posts or whatever on Instagram, whatever. But up until that point, I didn't have nothing for Omarosa to do. I really didn't. But when that man called her a dog, because see, that's again, he just happens to be outspoken. Like I said, there are some that may not even say it, but that's what they're thinking.
Yes.
And
they talk in circles. Like,
right.
There's undertones, it's racial undertones, and they're like, oh, you know, the difference with him is he just was outright with it.
Right.
But I mean, these are professional women, and it's like if professional women are being called, I just imagine how other black women are treated.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, Jesus. So it's one of the main inspirations I've had of when, you know, with my poetry is of having these moments of feeling like, you know, I'm not feeling like I'm nothing, but I'm treated as if I'm nothing.
Correct.
And the frustration of it and how I'm like determined to debunk that theory. I'm like, no, this is not who we are, and you're not going to force me to think that that's what I am.
Correct. Absolutely. I mean, and that's the spirit and the attitude in all honesty. And I tell folks all the time, I'm not Caucasian bashing. I'm not white bashing. I'm not any other ethnicity bashing. But I am saying for us to stand up. Don't allow anybody to tell you who you are or are not. Exactly what you just said. Look, you're not going to make me feel inferior. You're not going to make me feel that I'm less than I am. That's the only message that I'm constantly trying to get across to people who look like me and you in terms of don't allow anyone to define you. Don't allow anyone to make you feel that you're less than you are when you know. Like I said, that woman in Hidden Figures, she was the smartest person in the room. And thankfully, the character was played and she let them know that.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely. And that's why I like the fact that you say you're trying to debunk the myth.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. And it's no different from, you know, my screenplays and television scripts. It's the same thing. I'm like determined. I'm like, it's a mission. It's a goal. You know, you're not gonna have a definition of us and run with it. I'm not allowing it. And I love seeing that there are a lot of black artists now are having the same attitude even more. It's like, come on.
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad you said that in terms of as a screenwriter, you know, film writer, producer, what have you, that you're actually using your platform to send a message.
Yes.
That's critical. Mm-hmm. That is only because before you came on the air, I was saying in the 6 o'clock hour how last night I had the opportunity to watch the Flintstones. I had not watched the Flintstones in 20, 25, 30 years. Happened to be flipping through the TV and that was on. I stopped and I watched the episode. But watching it as an adult was totally different than watching it as a kid. There was a lot of messages in it. And most of our cartoons and things as kids that we saw, as you watch them as adults, they do have messages. And same with sitcoms and everything else. So,
yeah, they do.
So it is extremely important that as African-American or black screenwriters, film writers, authors, or what have you, that yes, we are putting that message out there.
Yes. Absolutely, because I like the message that you put out there. It's imperative, but I also think that we also, it's better to see us outside of the characters that they normally see us play, or the stories that they usually see black people in. Because, we're not a monolithic group of people. So, I mean, there's a show, Lovecraft Country, and it was on HBO. And what I loved about it this was the first time I've ever seen like a black cast that was in a show that was like supernatural and sci-fi and horror.
Right.
And usually I usually don't keep up with science fiction, but this story I wasn't. I was so compelled about it. I mean, it was the writing, the acting, the music. It was done so well. And, even though it was ignored by the Golden Globes, but nevertheless, it was just a beautiful piece of art. It's a great television show. And I was just excited to see us in a different light. It was mesmerizing, actually, because usually, there's a lot of black television shows that I do like, but it was something about this. I was like, this is great. It was a great step forward.
Well, that's the way it was with Black Panther. Black Panther wound up becoming Marvel's most successful superhero. Mm-hmm. Now, what I didn't know was that Black Panther was one of their characters back in the 60s. I didn't realize it. But as it turns out, once they put it in the movies and they did what they did with it, it wound up being their top producing film.
Yep.
And to this minute, there are folks that actually think there's a place that Wakanda exists. They think that's a real place.
Yeah, it's a real place.
But to your point of putting the message, and again, folks was able, I'm sorry that Chad Boswick passed away, because he was a fantastic actor.
Yeah.
And he played that Black Panther part to the letter. All of them. Definitely. All right. Mm-hmm. And so I could see why. But again, that's one of the reasons why. And I just said people actually think that place exists. But I am happy that it gave black people something to say that they connected to pride. Yeah. So that whenever they were doing the little symbols and the arm crossing and all that was a part of the movie, that was out of pride. That was out of, yes, I'm black, and yes, you're going to deal with my blackness.
Yes.
All right. So that I am happy. But to your point, as the messages are here, African-American screenwriters and film writers and script writers are out there, we have to do that. We have to uplift us. It's not that we're trying to take away from any other group, because I'll tell any other group, uplift yourself. Italian, definitely. Jewish, Ethiopian, Arabic, Bangladesh, whatever you are, be happy and proud of who you are. Just don't try to downplay me.
Exactly. That's been my number one problem too. I said I have no problem with you rooting for your own people. You should, absolutely, but you should not have to, put down another group of people to make yourself feel better.
Correct.
That's when we have problems.
That's exactly exactly the issue. You got to try to make me look bad, or either put me down in order for you to feel good. That's the issue. That's psychological.
Right? That's what that is. That's a psychological part. Because there's no need to do that. You don't need to look at another group and be like, oh, they're doing well. Okay, let me find a way to put them down so we can feel better. No.
Correct.
The world is big enough for us to do whatever we want to do. It's enough space for everyone.
Correct.
Not necessary.
That's absolutely right. There's enough out there for everybody born. There's enough for everybody alive. There's the universe, the world has enough for everybody. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not like if you go up, I go down. It's not a zero-sum game. There's enough for both of us. So, did you have an opportunity to pick any of a lot of times, and I told you I don't have a question list per se, but some of the questions, depending on the genre or the author, I will ask. And people, because I'm a musical artist as well, and I actually have a couple of musical CDs out, and people will ask, what's your favorite? And there's this movie one of my favorite movies, by the way, is called Keep the Faith, Baby. It's about Adam Clayton Powell Jr. And that's a question a reporter asked him in the film was, out of all of your accomplishments, which one is your favorite? And his response was, well, I really can't say any. That's like asking me which was my favorite kid. But I am going to ask you that question in terms of, out of the poems in the book, is there anyone's as particular that's a favorite?
One of my favorites is called Different.
Okay. Do you have Different in front of you?
Yes, I do.
All right. So you're going to have the opportunity right now to read Different then.
Okay. So the name of this poem is called Different. I am different. I am a new design, not the average print. Will I ever fit in? My only choice is to fit in with the sin. To say of truth that is to save thee, who wants to listen to them? I am as pompous as I can be. Each stone that is thrown, all the fire roared at me, I slowly melt to speak a way for a better day. Instead, I must speak positive corruption in every way I know. Now I know how Jesus felt.
All right, now wait a minute, because we don't clap hands. Let me back up from the mic a little bit so I can snap my fingers. And don't mind me, I have a crazy sense of humor, but absolutely. I heard the word pompous in there. I know that's right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's almost like the spirit that we do have to take on, not from the standpoint of trying to brag, not from the standpoint of trying to say I'm better than you. But again, I have to uplift myself. I have to encourage myself, as they say in the Bible. I have to encourage myself because you won't. And as we were talking a couple of minutes ago, in order for you to feel good about yourself, you got to put me down. So guess what? I'm not going to put me down with you.
No. No, absolutely not. Not doing that. No way. No way.
So interestingly enough, the title of that is different. That's another thing. Yeah. People need to understand. We ought to, rather than try to look at being different as something negative, we ought to celebrate differences.
Yes, we should.
Because if everybody was the same, it would be mighty boring.
It definitely would. I always say that. I'm like, it is very boring, albeit like, I'm like, please, no way.
It would be, I mean, if everybody was the same, it would be extreme. I mean, we ought to celebrate differences. I mean, that's another thing. Like I was talking earlier in the 6 o'clock hour. I don't understand the whole royalty thing over in London. I just don't. But I don't understand this whole notion of having to always look at something that's different as negative either.
Yeah.
I just don't understand. It just doesn't resonate with me because it's the differences is what brings out the best in everybody.
Exactly. That's what people remember. I mean, even if musicians, perfect example. Like, it's safe to say there'll never be another Prince.
Correct.
There'll never be a Whitney Houston. There'll never be another Tupac. I mean, there's some people where, when you hear that person's name, it's like there's nobody else you're thrown in the same category.
Correct.
And I've always have said that. I said it's so weird that because when you take some of these these people, like if you put them in this day and age, they would be judged so harshly, all because they're not like other people. Like if you was to put Prince in this day and age, they would be like, oh my God, why is he like this? Why is he this? Is he that? Is he that? So, and I think that's the unfortunate thing is that everybody thinks it's just cool to just be like everybody else. And I'm like, no, like, people who have the biggest fan bases are usually the ones that are literally not like other people.
That's right.
It's a huge advantage when you're not like other people. And as a person, that's your sanity right there. Just knowing you don't have to do a keeping up with the Joneses. It's like, this is me, and that's it. Accept it, take it, or leave it.
I'm laughing because I heard you just say about keeping up with the Joneses, and I saw a crazy meme on that the other day. It says, don't try to keep up with the Joneses because I just saw them at Walmart and their card declined.
Accurate.
But no, you're absolutely right in terms of, and what my parents and my mother particularly always told me was think for yourself. In other words, be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not trying to be anybody else. You're trying to be you. So you, as Amber Palmer, are not trying to be Shonda Rhimes.
No, I love Shonda, but I'm not trying to be her.
Correct. Absolutely. That's exactly why I said that. You're trying to be Amber Palmer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Nothing more, nothing less.
Exactly. And back to the fact that it's named different. To me, different, like I said, that's what really kind of makes it all. Like if you make soup or if you make any meal, it's the different spices that bring it out.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like when you just cook it and don't put nothing in it. And it's just bland. Well, that's the way things would be if everybody was the same. It would just be very bland. But yet, we get into these things about they had an absolute fit at the fact that Kamala was now going to be the first female vice president. Not to mention black and Asian and Jamaican and Indian and Had an absolute, like, what is wrong with that? And now that they're in there, you don't see any like difference in the fact that it's a woman in there versus when the men were in there.
No, and that's the thing. It's like they had like this fear factor. I said, "What are you fearing?"
Right.
Fear.
It's true.
Oh my God! Come on. Why would you fear her? Come on.
Right. I looked at a picture because she was standing behind Joe Biden, President Biden. She was standing off, toward the back to his right or left. I forget. But I sat there, and what came to my mind was what I just said. I said, she's been in there now, and it is no different than when it was two men in there.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, it might be a little bit better because I honestly believe that she's a very good advisor with him in terms of for him to bounce ideas off. And I've been in that scenario in terms of me being a principal and my vice principal was female. And I've always had wonderful relationships with my female vice principals and the principals who are my colleagues. So if I was president, I would prefer a female vice president or vice versa. Because to me,
I'm glad to hear you say that. Not too many men can admit to that, but I'm glad that you can.
It's just that, like, the vice principal that I worked with for the most amount of years, she ultimately wound up being principal of the school that I left. Whenever Biden and Kamala was running together, I sent her a text and I said, I hope those two work together as good as me and you did.
Wow, that's nice.
And because, literally, back to this difference thing, what I was good at, she was strong at. What she was not as good at, I was strong at. And the piece that was so complimentary between us that to this day, when the two of us walk around the district, people still connect us. But that's what I see with Biden and Harris, where President Biden might be weak or either, whatever. Kamala is strong and vice versa. I think that was a very good pairing. But yeah, it is. But like I said, but see, people get caught. Oh, it's a woman, and
oh yeah, that seems to be what people get stuck on. They get stuck on gender, and it's like, just move on. Just move on. Like, please, it's not a big deal. Just move past it. It's all right,
It is. And it's just, yes.
People freak out over it.
They do.
It's not a big deal.
They really do. We are in 2021, and we are still hearing first this, first that. First black this, first woman that, first this, that, first that. I saw the other day where the CEO of Walgreens now is a black woman. African-American female is CEO of Walgreens. And Walgreens, I shop there quite often. So I'm like, yes, all right now. So now I'm literally, as I go on Walgreens, I'm expecting to see some serious changes.
Yeah, I am too.
It's like, okay, we got a black woman at the top. I got a feeling she has a different eye and a different view. I'm expecting to see a few different changes in the store. But again, first black woman this, first black woman that, first black woman, first this, first, like, this is 2021, 2021 years, and we're still talking first.
Yeah, it's just like the first Native American woman is in the cabinet.
Right.
Like, really? Like the first?
No, really, no, the first.
It's weird. You would think a Native American would have been in the cabinet, but, well, it's crazy.
We are still talking the first this, the first that. And even like, I think the other, let me see, you had the two that got elected to the Senate from Georgia. John Ossoff. He's the first Jewish senator from Georgia. It's like, we're still first. First this, first that. Like, come on. So, do you have another one out of the Sapphire Myth that you'd like to share?
Yes, I do.
All right. I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you share another one out of the Sapphire Myth. And I like that, the Sapphire Myth, because all of these things are myths. They're stereotypes, they're myths, they're just straight up untruth. So go ahead, whatever, the second one, another one you'd like to share with us.
Okay. The name of this poem is called Bask. People will bask in your pain. The tears are like a flow of rain. People will hurt you and think nothing of it. The last sense of pride or dignity has been spent. My heart is broken in two. When will I ever be happy? I do not have a clue. The pain I feel every time I get kicked in the face again. The pain creeps It makes me sad again. To the end of my dismantle, I do not think anyone could handle. Misery loves company. Misery, you have another visitor for another day.
All right, here we go.
Yes.
All right. I'm snapping my fingers. That's right. All right. See, again, now, what I felt from that as you was reading it is like you're speaking for you, but for the most part, you are also speaking for just about every black woman's experience at some point or another.
Yeah,
at some point or another, a door has been kicked in their face. Speaking of that, in Hidden Figures, there was a scene with a door being slammed in her face. It was right there near the end. She was getting ready to walk in a meeting that she had given the numbers to.
Given the numbers.
She had provided the numbers, and she was trying to walk in the meeting, and they closed the door on her. And Kevin Costner opened it back up and let her in. But exactly in terms of, and that was symbolic of that. That's what, like, as soon as you said that, that's what came to my mind was that scene in the movie where they did that. Back to this science you were talking about. The screenwriters, the producers, the directors, they meant that to occur the way that it did to show you that message, that door was slammed in that black woman's face. And Kevin Costner went back and opened it and said she's coming into the meeting. All right. So again, I got from that in terms of and even not even so many, just black women in general, because this is women's history.
Women in general.
Women in general. I mean, women have only been allowed to vote only a certain amount of years. Because there's all these different isms. There's, of course, racism, but then you got the sexism thing going on. So, and women had both of them. Women had the sexism and the racism. And probably
it's a double whammy.
Right. Probably a few more isms in there, too. But
a lot of isms.
Certainly, all right, so the men, you've been a black man and you faced racism, but you didn't get the sexism. But women got both of them.
Yeah.
So at some point or another, just being a female, period, was you're not as, and even to this day, in terms of salaries, you're still talking the woman is making 75 to 80 cents on the dollar, where the male is making the full dollar and the female is making like 75, 80 cents, something like that. That's still in 2021.
Yeah. Yep.
So even that sends a message that you can do the same job, but we're not going to pay you the same.
Yep. And that's something that I went through. I went through that, and it was very humiliating because it was not only just I was getting paid less, but I had a manager that came in there, and she only knew me from face value and decided that I shouldn't be paid like everybody else. And I think what was really humiliating about it is how even like people at my job, when I would talk to them about it, they were aware of what was really going on here, but they wouldn't dare really call it for what it is. I should say my non-black coworkers at the time, and I think, I fought it, and I ultimately, it changed, but even once I did get paid what I was supposed to, I was still technically getting paid less. And that's the part I couldn't do too much with. But it was the fact that this lady came in there 3 weeks in, and was like, nope, she's not going to be paid like everybody else. And I already had put in like 4 or 5 years with this company. So it's really,
no, it's real. I mean, for listening audience,
very real.
It's real because if anybody were to say, "Well, Mark, how come you cover the race issues and all that so much on your show?" It's because it's real. It's not a matter of black people being too sensitive. It's not a matter of women being too sensitive. It's not a matter of anything. The fact of the matter is, these things happen. They're real.
Yes, they're very real. I mean, the work I was doing was no different, and if not more, than some of my coworkers. And I could have, been petty and been like, oh, well, look at what they're doing. Look what I didn't do that, because it wasn't about me versus them. It was me versus this woman who came in here and said, well, she shouldn't be paid like anyone else, and had no clue what I was doing. And I remember I was open to speaking to her and actually explaining, what my work was and what did I do every day, what my responsibilities were. She just was not interested. And she ultimately, was terminated. But It was so bold. I wasn't shocked, but the boldness of it and the humiliation, it was just like, oh my God, I'm coming here, minding my business, and I'm working hard, and this is what I get. So it's a very real thing. And this is, the last thing I wanted to do was bring attention to myself, because I knew what it was going to turn into. It was going to turn into a stereotype. Oh, you're ungrateful, you this, you that.
Back to the angry again. back the aggressive, the anger. Yes. Full circle.
Yes, it's full circle. I'm like, I'm not angry. I'm just like, why is this lady coming in here talking about how I shouldn't be paid like everybody else? That's my question. I want an answer. That's all.
And that's a fair question.
Very simple.
And that's a fair question that, regardless of anybody's skin color or ethnicity, would have been asked.
Yeah, regardless, yeah.
That's a fair question. Well, how come I'm not being paid like such and such, and I'm doing the same work? That's a fair question, regardless of skin color. Yet, if you ask it, she asked that because she's the angry black woman.
Exactly. And I'm like, wow. So
now, see, there again. Yeah, good. And I'm going to take you back to the movie again. I'm telling you, I could not sit down for that movie. I'm going to take you back there again in terms of the scene, and another bathroom scene where the woman now addresses the black woman by her last name, Mrs. Such and Such. And then I don't remember all the character names. That's why I'm not trying to call them. But there was a scene in the bathroom where the Caucasian woman now addresses the African-American woman by her last name, Mrs. Such and Such, and now she addressed her back as Mrs. Such. But there was a scene prior to that where the Caucasian woman says, well, I want you to know I'm really not against you, or something. And then she says, well, I'm glad, Miss Such and Such, that you believe that. I mean, I took that movie back in. I mean, it's just like I just need to remember the character names. But there was that scene prior to the scene where she gets promoted to supervisor, and those girls were the ones that done the calculations, and because the computer didn't do it right, and her girls came in and they figured it all out. But they got into the bathroom there at the end of the movie, and now that showed respect. And so when I'm hearing you say you had a supervisor or somebody come in and say, well, you're not going to get paid, it was like that. And that movie was back again. This was going back into the space whenever we were trying to develop the Space Center back in the early 60s. You're talking about an experience in 2000, in the 2000s. Yes. So that means it's still going on. Yep,
definitely. So, yeah, it's I just really just want to see people just to keep fighting. Just don't take it.
Right.
Just keep pushing.
Right.
And really just don't let it. I mean, it was just like, I think it was yesterday, and it was on the talk, and Sharon Osbourne was having a meltdown about defending her friend Pierce Morgan, and she told Cheryl to not cry, and I was like, excuse me? She's like, oh yeah, don't you cry. And I'm like, this is what and Cheryl, she was so calm and reserved. I give her tons of credit. And I said, that was a perfect example of being told how we should feel.
Right.
She was immediately saying, okay, you don't have a right to cry. You don't have a right to be angry. And I'm like, really? This is exact criticism that we're talking about, that we're not allowed to have feelings.
Correct.
We're just supposed to just be just there, just space.
Correct. I mean, not for nothing. Piers, and I've followed Piers. I've heard Piers before, but see, again, I don't think Piers would have said what he said about Megan, about Kate. I mean, he just said, I don't believe a word that she says.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing.
I don't believe a word that she says. Now, see, again, for those of you that can read between the lines and you understand the implication and the stereotypes and the myth, as we're talking about, you need to understand what he's really saying there, because I don't think that would have been said about Kate. All right? No. And then he did the reason he wound up being let go was, I guess he thought he was Trump, because whenever Trump was being interviewed, when Trump was being interviewed for 60 Minutes, he got up and walked off on Leslie Stahl. So I guess Piers kind of saw that and thought he could do the same thing, just got up and walked off. But see again, like you just saying, now you tell this girl who's sharing her thoughts, and now she's being told don't cry.
Yes.
It's this whole dismissal of feelings. that causes the frustration that you're writing about and the myth. All right. So the very thing that you're causing, now you want to sit here and act like, well, that's just the way they are. Like, well, if somebody was doing that to you, you would probably, if not more, react the same way, if not worse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. and that's the crazy thing about it. It's like, it's not to say that other women don't, face sexism. This is not about who's facing more than what. But the truth of the matter is, it's more glaring with black women.
Only because, like we said a few minutes ago, because it's the double. Now, women in general, no question, got hit with sexism, no question.
Yeah.
But now, whenever you're another ethnicity, you get hit with a combination of racism and sexism.
Yeah.
All right. So one group of women may only get hit with one ism. Another set of women may be getting hit with 2 or 3 isms.
Yeah.
And God help you if you happen to be black, woman, and gay. Now you got hit with a 3rd ism.
Yeah, you got 3. You got triple.
Yeah, right. So and as more things that you add on, the more isms that you're facing. Back to what you were saying about being different.
Yeah. And my thing is that no matter what, I don't care who you are. You should always take pride of just who you are in general.
Correct.
But it's the pride that we have is used as a weapon against us. It's
correct.
Just like, let me use this. Let me take, what they would consider, for us, it's confidence. It turns into attitude.
Correct.
Or you're too brash, and it turns into, let me use this against you. Let me use this against you to not promote you, to not hire you, to make you feel less than who you are.
Well said. Well said. That's exactly right. Whenever we're being prideful, it's used against us. However, they're surrounded by their greatness everywhere they look. And yet, whenever we now stand up for ourselves, like you just said, well said, is used against us. And I tell you what, see how quickly the time is gone? Our little hour and a few minutes has zipped by. It's like after 8 already. But I told you it's going to be conversational. But at this point, what I do is at the end of the interview is I shut the mic off for a couple of minutes and you get an opportunity to promote. You can let folks know how they can get a copy of the Sapphire Myth. If you're doing any book signings, I know we talked earlier about you're in the creation stage of your webpage or whatever. That's not ready yet. But any way that folks can get in touch with you or they can order the book or if they want to know more about it, this is your opportunity to promote. So for the next minute or so, and you can say anything with the exception of the dollar amount. If you want to shout anybody out, you can do that. You can do anything with the exception to say what anything costs. But as far as contact information and shout outs, that for the next minute or so you can do. So I'm going to turn the mic off and turn it over to you, and then we'll be done.
Okay. Thank you.
It's yours. You promote. You say what you, it's yours. You got it. It's yours.
Okay. My book, The Sapphire Myth, it is currently in Barnes & Noble. It is on Amazon. I would like to thank my cousin, the illustrator of this book, Corey K. Williams. He also has books as well, so please check him out as well. I am going to eventually have a website, and I have an author's profile that I'm working on Amazon. I will be eventually updating that so I can have a website and a link so people can at least get an audio version of some of my poems, a snippet. So thank you guys for listening to my interview, and I'm hoping the Sapphire Myth, I hope it resonates with people, and I hope it inspires. I hope it's cathartic. I just hope that, you take my poetry and you can relate to it and just stay blessed.
I know that's right. Well, I tell you what, thank you so much for rising and joining me early. This is a part of my Women's History Month theme, and the conversation fit right into the theme. Last week, I had Naomi with me, and she was the cousin of my security guard of our security guard, Karen Jones. And this week I have you, and you're the cousin of one of the teachers at the school, Kim Williams. So I'm shouting out both Karen Jones as well as Kim Williams for recommending authors to me to be on the show. And both of you have done wonderful in terms of our first 2 Saturdays in March for Women's History. It is a history for sure. And again, people try to overlook the contributions of women the same way they try to look the contributions of other ethnic groups. From a gender perspective, they try to overlook and that's why, because I'm going to tell you this, Women's History Month for me is the same as Black History Month. It's not just a month. Mm-hmm. It's 365 days a year.
Yeah.
So definitely. It's just that we take, February to pause for Black history, and for March we pause for women. And so because we do that, I go into theme mode. But wonderful job. The book is The Sapphire Myth. The author is Amber, Amber Palmer, Palmer. And again, as she said, the book is available on Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble. Well, Amber, again, thank you for joining me. And I do record the episodes. It'll be on my YouTube channel. So for those who did not rise early to catch us, they can go back and hear it in the archives.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'll send you the links whenever I'm done editing.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
All right.